Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Hadley Manning. Thank you for joining us for our IWF Reads author chat. Today we'll be discussing How to Raise a Conservative Daughter by Michelle Easton. But before we welcome Michelle, let me introduce myself. As I said, my name is Hadley Manning. I'm Director of Policy at Independent Women's Forum, and I happen to be the mother of 2 daughters and 1 son. So I was very interested to read How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. At IWF, my job is to oversee the work of our policy department and to help steer our positions on policy issues. However, in my home, which I see as my more important job, my job is to be a mom and a guide for my kids in this ever-changing world. So I'm thankful to my own parents for raising me to be a conservative. Of course, like everyone, I went through some phases of life where those views were challenged a lot. So this is a very important discussion for me, and I imagine for a lot of our other parents and audience members today. So thanks again for joining us. Before I bring Michelle Easton on screen, I'm going to give everyone a few tips on how to engage with this platform that we're using today. So forgive me as I read some housekeeping tips. On the right side of your screen is a chat room. That's where you can join the discussion with other attendees and with my IWF teammates, hi guys, who will have a T next to our names. If you're not seeing the chat room, just select the arrow in the top right corner to open the chat window. Okay, next to the chat room tab, there's a questions tab. If you have a question for Michelle, please post it in the questions tab. I'll be checking there, looking for good questions to ask Michelle. You can also give other attendees questions bumps by hitting the up arrows. That'll help me find the best questions fastest. Towards the end of our time with Michelle today, we'll be drawing 3 names to win copies of her book. In order to win, you must be present during the drawing at the end of today's event, so be sure to stick around until the end. The books will be mailed out to our door prize winners. Okay, now that we have those housekeeping tips out of the way, let me introduce our guest today. Michelle Easton is the founder and president of the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women, which prepares young women for leadership in policy, civil society, and the family. The mother of 3 grown sons, she has hundreds of daughters whom she's helped launch into productive and fulfilling adulthood. A lawyer and laborer in the conservative movement since the early 1970s, Easton has worked through all 12 years of the Reagan-Bush administrations, including presidential appointments in the education department. She lives in Virginia and Florida with her husband, Ron Robinson. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Easton. Michelle, come on up on screen. I'm looking forward to discussing how to raise a conservative daughter with you. I've got some questions, and I'm sure our audience members will have questions as well. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Maybe first, can you just tell us a little bit about the book? Why did you write it? What does it say? Why should we read it?
Well, I founded this Center for Conservative Women 28 years ago and worked with these incredible young women, mostly college age, a few high school. And I started to notice over the years some things that had happened in their upbringing, in their childhood and through their growing up years that they had in common, that somehow they all combined to turn them into these incredible, smart, gracious, articulate, brave, courageous young women who were very dedicated to promoting conservative ideas. And at the same time, over the years, from parents, grandparents, many of our supporters, they would say to me, where do you find these young women? What is it about their lives that makes them so extraordinary? And I thought, I need to write a book about this. And it's taken me years to do. God bless the people that helped me, people on the staff, people who helped me with editing and writing. Really wasn't a lot of research in this. It's what I learned from the young women I've been working with over the years. And so I found a publisher, Regnery Publishing, and the current head of Regnery is Tom Spence. Prior to that, it was Margie Ross, and she was on my board, and she loved the idea. Tom came along, and I thought, oh, I hope he wants to do it too. And he has 4 or 5 daughters, several of whom had actually participated with us at different events. One was a summer intern. And he said, oh, Michelle, I really want to do this book. So we published it July 6th. It's been very well received. Regnery's ordered a second printing. And I'm just delighted to be on with you and IWF, which is such a fine group, to talk about it.
Well, thanks for joining us today. So I have kind of a funny question maybe to get started, but I live in Denver, so I'm joining everybody. It's 11:08 a.m. my time. But I was at a park recently reading your book. And I'll tell you that I read a book by Senator Blackburn, which also had a similar title, The Mind of a Conservative Woman. And
Yes.
I took the book jacket off of Senator Blackburn's book before I would read it in public in my neighborhood, because my neighborhood is so dark blue. It's a pretty liberal, pretty progressive neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so I was at the park reading your book, and I thought to myself, I wonder what my neighbors might think if they saw me reading this book. They might be thinking, why would someone want to raise a conservative daughter? Why would someone want to do that? So let's start with this question. Why would anyone want to raise their kids, or especially their daughters, to be a conservative?
Well, I lay it out in 11 chapters in the book. First, because conservative ideas are really common sense. Women who live by conservative ideas, from what I've seen, tend to be happy. Rachel Campbell Duffy calls them happy warriors. We're happy warriors. A key is faith. Okay, faith, whether you're Christian, Jewish, whatever you are, it's a cornerstone. Understanding freedom, understanding the difference between freedom and socialism. What makes people happier, what makes them more ambitious, want to work hard. Understanding money, manage money early and often. That's one of my chapters. Understanding hard work is a virtue. When you separate work from income, it's usually not good. So these are all parts of being a conservative, things that most moms and dads, if they thought of it in those terms, would want their daughters to be conservative, respecting life at the beginning and at the end. What could be better than a happy warrior, conservative woman?
Right. Well, that's a good segue to my next question, because I think a lot of the values that you discuss in the book are pretty popular in all circles. You talk about hard work and you talk about service to others. However, there are some ideas in the book that I would say in this cultural moment are decidedly unpopular. And I'm thinking about specifically how you describe the differences between men and women, or maybe the importance of putting family first, which I think is something that we would all, in all political circles give lip service to, but really making the sacrificial choices to put family first. And I think this is particularly hard for women, maybe in my age group where we've got young children. We've got to make those tough choices about how much do we lean into our careers versus, doing the things that our families need from us at home. So what advice do you have for parents, maybe parents like me, especially as the new school year starts and we're about to send kids onto school, when we're raising children in a cultural environment that, at least I feel, is increasingly hostile to certain conservative or traditional values?
It is increasingly hostile, and all the more reason why we want to teach our women, our young girls, to celebrate their differences from men. A woman's differences are her strengths. The popular culture idea today that men and women are just exactly the same is false. It's a lie. You think about the breathtaking miracle of childbirth, which you just had. We're not really the same, are we?
No.
I always joke with my husband and say, while your contribution to our child morally and legally is very, very important, it's actually very small, and we laugh, but women have this unique ability to carry and bear the children with the contribution in the beginning from the dad. That's something to celebrate. This idea, and it's very controversial right now here in Northern Virginia, Loudoun County. They just voted yesterday. The public school board voted that the boys or girls who feel like the opposite sex can go into the bathrooms now, can go into the big open showers if they're feeling like the other sex on that day. It's so offensive to the privacy of most boys and girls. And the truth is, on this issue, despite what you read in the papers and the TV and the popular culture, I think we're winning on this issue. There's uprisings all over the country to recall school boards that are forcing this kind of a thing on children. And the truth is, it's not just conservatives on this. It's liberals. It's even feminists who say, wait a minute, we fought so long for women to be recognized as women, and now we're saying, well, there's not really women. And, you're not allowed to say in the popular culture, well, only women can have babies. Really? I think the common sense of the differences between men and women is really coming through. First off, you teach your daughters there's no intellectual differences between men and women, but there are physical differences. And one of the booklets that we use here is Sense and Sensibility, Sexuality, off of the Jane Austen, Sense and Sensibility. That's the play. A Woman's Guide to Protection in a Hooked Up World. There are huge differences between men and women when it comes to physical intimacy. And this book teaches young women about it. It's not moralistic, much as I like to pound the desk and be moralistic. It's written by a very, very excellent doctor who talks about the medical, physical differences between men and women. When it just comes to kissing and hugging, they're huge. And girls who don't understand this can get really messed up in college. That's why we hired her to write this as a fellow. And it's why she said so many of these girls that would come in with troubles would say, if only anybody had told me that men and women were so different when it comes to physical intimacy. So I would argue young women, moms with daughters, dads with daughters, teach them to celebrate the wonderful differences between men and women. We love men here at Luce. We're mostly married. We have sons. I have 3 sons. But there are differences, and it's a wonderful thing. We're not absolutely alike. The boys shouldn't be racing against the girls in track and other sports because they're bigger. They have bigger hearts, they have bigger bones, they have bigger muscles, and they're usually going to beat us. It's so unfair to rob young women of opportunities to win athletic contests. So we feel very strong, and this is really key, Hadley. Celebrate the differences between men and women because the differences are their strength. And let me just tell you one more thing. I sometimes hesitate to say this, but it always gets a laugh. My grandmother, God bless her, God rest her soul, used to say, and this was back in the days, the early days of equal rights for women, and she would say, why would any woman want to step down to equality with a man?
I like that. I like that. And I like what you're saying about sort of the common sense elements, the differences between men and women, but also the scientific evidence is on our side when we say that men and women are different. And I'll recommend just briefly another book that we're going to feature on an author chat, Mom Genes by Abigail Tucker. It's a new book and it explores really the way that motherhood changes our bodies and changes our brains even. And sometimes in the popular culture, we joke about, having mom brain, or it might make you more forgetful or something, but it actually makes us so much more emotionally intelligent, and it makes us so much stronger in so many ways. So I think that, what you're saying about the differences between men and women absolutely is borne out in the science. And so it makes it not just a common sense or logical position, but one that we can support with evidence. Speaking of science, science has been a very hot topic during the COVID pandemic. And it's had, this pandemic has had serious implications for all aspects of life. And that includes our lives as parents, our family lives. And so I wanted to ask you, in reading this book, I thought it'd be great to get Michelle's perspective on sort of the long-term political implications for families who are trying to steer our kids towards the right values in the midst of this pandemic. How do you think that this pandemic experience will challenge parents, or how might it maybe provide a silver lining for those of us who are trying to raise our kids right in this crazy time and in this crazy world?
Well, the silver lining is clearly for families that didn't spend a lot of time together in their home because they were working and the kids were busy and all. They've learned to spend time together. And I've heard about some marriages that have failed because it was too much time, but generally speaking, it's been great. One of the big things I talk about in the book and that I've done in my personal life is dinner every night together. And it's hard, mom, dad working, sometimes traveling, the kids are doing sports and things. If you can have dinner together every night and use that as an opportunity to talk about some of these important things, and COVID has forced it in many cases, and families are doing more things together at home and going outside together. So that's the good news of it. The bad news, in my opinion, is for some people to think that you just work at home for your whole life. And some people will, but some professions, some jobs need you to be there in the office. And there's a fair amount of resistance now to that from some people who got used to being home during COVID. I also think it's generated a bit of a contempt for so-called science. There was an article actually in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. I cut it out in preparation for this. The case against masks for children. The notion that we all wore these masks for so long. In the beginning, nobody was really sure, but there's no science behind this notion of mask mandates for children. But in schools all over the country, children are going to be forced to wear masks. So I think it's created a contempt for science and also for some previously highly regarded government agencies like the CDC. Dr. Fauci changed his mind over and over again. So this whole COVID, well, certainly the economic, for all the small businesses that failed, for all the restaurants that failed, they were closed for so long. It's really a mix of things. The best news is families spending more time together. But some of the other things are, in my opinion, quite negative.
I have to agree with you, and I'm sending my 3 and 5-year-old kids back to school here in a couple weeks, and both of them will be required to wear masks, and I'm quite bummed out about that. I'd love to hear what folks think about this topic, about the pandemic and masks on kids, if you're in the chat window. Michelle did mention an article from the Wall Street Journal by Dr. Marty McCary, and it's called The Case Against Masks for Children. We've also written on this topic extensively at IWF, so if you go search for masks and children on our website, I bet you can find a lot of great information there. But I have seen some people mentioning in the chat window, Michelle, their experience as parents, and really this challenging time where maybe you have a teenager or your child goes to college or they're in their 20s and they're really exploring their own identity and becoming an adult. And this seems to be a very challenging time, and so I wanted to ask you specifically, how can we better navigate that time as parents when it comes? For me, it seems so far off, but I'm sure it will be here as I blink in an instant. But what mistakes do you see parents frequently making as they're trying to raise conservative kids and keep those kids conservative as they go through those rocky years? And what advice do you have there?
Right. Well, in my opinion, today, the biggest mistake is to just sit back and say, well, just let her develop as she wants. It used to be you could do that, certainly when I was growing up. If your family was conservative and you went to church or synagogue, you could pretty much count on your kids turning out to be pretty conservative. It's not that way today anymore. With toxic social media, with radical indoctrination in the schools, with the entertainment industry seeming to pander to the lowest sort of cravings, it's not a fair fight anymore if you just sit back, because so much of what is taught is anti-conservative. So that's what I would say. Today, as a conservative parent, it's much harder. It's much harder. And you need to think about your values, and you need to think of practical ways to instill them, which is what I try to do in the book, give you practical ideas how to instill them in your child. I don't believe you can just sit back anymore and say, well, we'll just see what happens. And there's no guarantee that if you do everything right, that your girl will turn out right. But you have a much better shot working at it. It's harder being a parent. It's harder being a young woman these days. That would be my primary advice. You're not going to pound on her. You're not going to lecture on her. You're going to look for opportunities to introduce her to these ideas. Dinner table conversations are wonderful. You can start with 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds with some of these issues, to talk about them, to get her thinking about them, and to expose her to the kind of values that you have as a mom and as a conservative.
Well, we've got some great questions for you in the questions tab, and I want to get to some of those. I also want to remind everyone that we're going to be drawing 3 names for a book drawing, and as soon as I have those names, I'll let you guys know. You have to stay until the end of our event, so we're hoping to wrap up sort of at the bottom of the hour. But I have one more question from me before I get to our questions tab, and this is a question I mentioned to Michelle before we started today's show, and I wanted to ask about, in some families, there's a conservative parent and they're raising a daughter with someone who's not as conservative. Maybe not someone who's a flaming, leftist, but someone who's more moderate or center left. Or do you have any advice for those families where mom and dad don't agree on political philosophy? How can those parents raise conservative kids? Or maybe even more broadly, how can families who maybe have a grandparent or an aunt or uncle who has really strong liberal views, how can they navigate that?
Well, I always like to say first on that, check with Mary Madeline and James Carville, see how they did it. I mean, it's a real challenge when you have different views. in my family, my husband and I were different faiths,
Okay.
both Christian, but quite different. And so how did we do that? Well, on Friday night, we went to Catholic Mass. And on Saturday night, we went to Catholic Mass, all of us together. And on Sunday morning, we went to my church, which was Episcopal. Now it's Anglican. People, the Baptists say, oh, they're basically the same. Not really. There's really some doctrinal differences between them. So what does that mean? It means that we both presented our faith ideas to our children, and they did okay with it. Sometimes they would say, "Oh, Ma, do we have to do double?" And I'd say, "You are so blessed to have two churches you can go to where you can learn how much God loves you." And they'd roll their eyes and everything. But it worked. And so I guess I would argue for the same thing with political differences, that you, in a kind and gentle sort of way, you introduce your ideas to your children. There's certain sort of core issues, like, is a man a man? Is a baby a human or a bunch of cells? Those are really tough ones. I had lunch with several of our college interns today, and they were, they're 20, and they said, well, why would you marry somebody that you had, these kind of disagreements with? And sometimes other things take over. Sometimes the point of view develops differently over the years. So it's a challenge, but I think if you're loving about it, you can have disagreements. But I mean, the whole point of my book is don't sit back and let it happen. So if you're the conservative parent, the conservative mom, you got to argue better than he does. You've got to present the issues better than he does. And I think you can do that because our ideas are so superior. People are happier under freedom than left-wing ideas. So I wish you all luck with that. I've been through it on faith, but not on policy. We were both philosophical conservatives when we married. We still are.
Well, I think that you're right that the key is to marry someone that you have at least a similar worldview with. It can be very difficult, I imagine, if you have opposite worldviews, right?
Yes.
I want to get to one question from our questions tab from our audience. I'm afraid that's all we're going to have time for. We just have a few more minutes. But Jennifer Cabaney writes, you mentioned sitting down to dinner and having conversations with your kids as one practical tip. What are some other practical, easy tips we can do at home right now to raise conservative daughters?
One of the things I recommend in the book, and I've seen this from these young men when we get in here, read. If you are not a reader, start to read. Let your children see you reading. And in the book, I recommend some good general books for young women to read. Reading is such a wonderful thing, and it's so much better for young women than social media. Many parents don't understand how damaging social media really can be. Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat. There's all kinds of negative things in social media, and it's a kind of a limiting life. A lot of kids, a lot of young women are glued to their phones, to their computer. You can make her life so much richer if you encourage her, force her to join a church group, to do sports, to take a musical instrument, to do art, to do more things that are really enriching people, where things where she's with people all the time, as opposed to social media. You can't totally restrict it in this day and age. When my kids were growing up, TV was the bad guy, the waste of time. School nights, there was no TV. Okay, so 5 nights a week, they read, they did sports, they did this, they did that. I think parents have got to restrict it if their kids are really, really glued to social media. So dinner table, read, off of social media. There's 3 things for you.
Thank you. Those are great tips. And I know we all love to have practical ideas that we can start to implement right away. I also recommend as a practical tip that everyone read this book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. It's a great place to start. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. I have 3 copies of this book for our drawing winners. So forgive me as I look on my phone and announce. First winner is Giovanna. Giovanna, great friend and supporter of IWF. We are so excited that you're one of our book winners today. Terry Keegstra. You're a winner. Congratulations. And Carrie, the last name. Toma Sigwitz. I am so sorry if I butchered your last name, Carrie, but we have Giovanna, Terry, and Carrie. If I announced you as a winner, please hang around. Someone from our team will get in touch with you to get an address where we can send you a copy of Michelle's book. Michelle, I wanted to thank you and say what an honor it was to have the chance to speak with you today. Thank you for sharing your insights about your book. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Well, just that it's hard being a parent, and if you want to raise a conservative daughter, you have got to work at it. You have got to engage her in conversation. You've got to get her thinking. You've got to look for examples all the time of socialism versus freedom. Why are all those people in Central America going twice as far to come to America instead of trekking down to Venezuela or getting on rafts and going out to Cuba? Because freedom is a much better way to live, a free country, than socialism. So looking for examples all the time, again, without pounding on her, to have a much better chance that your daughter turns out to be the conservative that you want her to be. And Hadley, I'm so grateful to you for this wonderful interview. I've signed 3 copies of the book, and they're UPS to that address that you asked me to. I've admired the work of IWF for so many, many years, and I still do. And thank you again.
Wonderful. So not only will our drawing winners be getting copies of the book, they will be signed copies of the book. So thank you, Michelle, for doing that. I really enjoyed this conversation today as well. For our audience members, if you haven't already, please join our exclusive Facebook group called IWF Reads Book Club. It's a private group just for our IWF Reads members like you. It's a great way to keep up with our books and events and to engage with other IWF Reads members. I'd also like to tell you a bit more about Independent Women's Forum. We've mentioned IWF several times today, but in case you're not familiar with us, we are the leading national women's organization dedicated to developing and advancing policies that enhance people's freedom, choices, and well-being. We have an amazing staff of all women, some of the sharpest policy communications and legal minds in the country. We testify before Congress and state legislatures. We produce educational materials and publish articles about various policy issues. We have a law center that files legal briefs in various court cases. We frequently interface with the media to make our case for better public policy. I'm talking about network news and major newspapers and so forth. We also make a point to champion women from across the country and celebrate their accomplishments in their lives. If you haven't read our Champion Women profiles, I hope you'll check those out on IWF.org under the About tab. And we release a new profile every 2 weeks. Check out our website for more information. That's IWF.org. Sign up to become an email subscriber and even a mobile insider for special text alerts so you can get the latest news, updates, and events from IWF. I also want to encourage everyone to learn more about Independent Women's Network, which is a new online membership community that we've launched at IWF along with our affiliated organization IWV, and that's Independent Women's Network. It's a community for women, by women, where you can connect. And those are all my closing announcements. Thank you guys for bearing with me, and thank you for participating in today's discussion. Special thanks to Michelle for joining us as our guest. I really appreciate the time we've had together. Michelle, everybody else, I hope you have a great weekend ahead, and we hope to see you again soon at another IWF Reads event. Bye.
Bye.